What is up, everybody? Welcome to a new episode of Destination the Shows. This is episode 63. It is Wednesday, January 8th, 2025. Joined as always by Jeremy Nygaard. Jeremy, Happy New Year, buddy. How are you?
Yeah, man. I'm good. I'm good.
It's been a minute.
It's crazy. It's 2025. Yeah, we haven't done this for what? Almost it was like 2.5 weeks or something.
Yep.
So no, I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm tired of I feel like I've been very cold for a long spell, but in 2 months, I'm not going to be because I have my spring training trip booked and I'm very excited. And so that's what I got going on, man. Spring training in Fort Myers in very early March. And I know you're a veteran of spring training, but I am not. I've actually never been. So this is going to be my first trip, and I'm supremely excited.
Yeah, it's super fun. It's something that everybody should do. Yeah, you'll enjoy it. You'll geek out at like the nerdy stuff, which is when you see guys that you recognize on the backfields,
Yeah.
that nobody else knows, right?
There you go.
Like, hey, they took him in the 17th round last year, and you say it, and people will be like, huh?
Who cares?
I don't know that guy. But yeah, it'll be fun. The weather will be phenomenal. The food's great. You get out, you'll walk out of the airport and you'll be like, this is good smelling air right here.
Dude, I'm ready. I am absolutely ready to be warm. I can't wait. It's going to be fun. I will report back, and you're going to send me a list of recommendations. So if anyone is planning on going to spring training or doing spring training for the first time, hit me up because we'll pass along what I've learned along the way and what I learned from you. But I'm excited, Jeremy, to start talking baseball again. I wish we had more news to dig into. It's been cold outside and it's been cold on the news front. And it's funny, right? Because I feel like a couple of weeks before we took a 2-week hiatus here, we were saying about how this is like the most fun winter meetings period in recent history in like 3, 4, 5 years. And it has been slow going everywhere since, but especially for the teams that we talk about the most. I feel like it's been dead.
Yeah, but I think it's true. The winter meetings was more fun than it had been, and
Agreed.
it's like this slow, everything drags on. I mean, even Verlander signing yesterday didn't really get a lot of fanfare, which is weird. But it's like the off season of baseball takes, like, it's happening at the same time where the NFL rules everything.
Mm-hmm.
And the NBA starts to become a little bit more relevant because it's after Christmas.
Yep.
And so you get it in this time. College basketball is getting to the conference slate, college football playoffs. Like, where does baseball really fit into there?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but for sure, there's been not a lot of news. I think maybe we'll get some bigger news here in the next 10 days or so.
Yeah. So speaking of, we'll do a quick round. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk international signing period because that opens up a week from today, which is always exciting. And you and I like to nerd out about, like we laugh about scouting reports because they all kind of sound the same for 16 and 17-year-old kids who it's really impossible to project how they're going to be. But we'll definitely spend some time breaking down the classes for the 3 teams that we cover the most. We'll talk about those prospects at a really high level. We'll talk about kind of how the international signing period works. But I want to do a roundup of some random news and notes that are at least interesting and kind of tangential to the teams that we cover before we do that. So first one, we'll start with the Twins because Twins fans have been absolutely desperate for roster-related news. They made a very low wattage trade with the Boston Red Sox, sending Giovanni Moran to Boston in exchange for Mickey Gasper, a utility catcher, first baseman. Don't think he's really a catcher type.
Right.
Any thoughts on the Gasper trade? Does that excite you, Jeremy, given that they've done absolutely nothing else and they're essentially sitting out the offseason so far? What do you think of the Gasper trade?
Yeah, so that news broke when we were at a Christmas party on Christmas Eve.
Okay.
And my son tells me, and he's like, hey, the Twins made a trade. And I was like, ooh. And then he tells me who got traded. And I was like, oh, okay. And then he tells me the name of the guy they got. And I said, well, who was he? And so it's not really exciting because there's not much to it. I think he'll obviously fill a role. That the Twins have been seeking a catcher who would bat from the left side of the plate for literally ever, right? I mean, that's been like when you platoon, that's what you're looking for. I don't know how he fits because he's not like going to be your main catcher or your backup catcher.
Right.
But the Twins also love guys that have positional flexibility. And so when you have a roster stacked with these types of players, and then one of them that can also catch, it lengthens your bench because you can now, if you so choose, DH your second catcher, or play your second catcher in the field and then to make him, defensively replace him at some point late in the game, if you want to do that, because you can keep this guy on the bench. And then when you're left-handed too, that offers a little bit of something, and you can play around the diamond, right? So from a roster perspective, it's kind of a neat addition. But when you look at the fact that he's 29 and has never had really any success at all in the big leagues, I mean, what really is there? So not like a super high upside trade, but I think good from a depth perspective and knowing how the Twins try to operate.
And any regrets, Jeremy, on moving on from Giovanni Moran, who is a left-handed reliever, and we've talked a little bit about how non-existent those are for the Twins, with also old friend Caleb Thielbar signing a 1-year deal with the Chicago Cubs on New Year's Eve. Moran was rehabbing from injury, nasty changeup. Showed flashes, I think it's fair to say, of showing like he might be able to be kind of a medium leverage guy, but really struggled with strike throwing and it just issuing too many walks to look like a viable, reliable guy long term. Any kind of regrets there from your perspective of moving on from Moran while he's rehabbing?
No, but I do. I mean, I think there was value that small, but I think that he had value because, like you said, he was lefty. He is a left-handed pitcher. He does have a really good changeup. But I think that also goes to show kind of where in the pecking order he would be if healthy. So if the Twins view Cody Funderburk as just a superior option, even right now or in the future, they've never wanted or had carried so many lefties. Like there's no lefties now, which is weird. But I don't think there's any regret. I think it was like he's got a little bit more value because he made it through the Rule 5. He's going to rehab. He's not going to take up a 40-man spot. Kind of a low risk buy for the Red Sox. And in return, the Twins got something of probably very similar value that does take up a 40-man spot. So I don't think that this is going to be one that you look back and be like, man, shouldn't have given up that guy. And whenever you can make a trade like that, it's not really something to worry about. And even trades that you do, like we'll talk about a guy here in a little bit, the chances of that happening are pretty slim. So good for both of them to get a new opportunity, right? Because that's what they're going to get that they never got in their former home. So I'm not going to have any regrets about Giovanni Moran.
Okay, so nice segue, Jeremy. Speaking of guys you wouldn't expect to regret letting go of, let's talk about Brent Rooker for a second, because he does unfortunately check that box, although I don't think any Twins fans can have complaints there. But he signed a 5-year extension with the A's for $60 million. I believe with performance incentives that can get all the way up to $90 million. Seems to be universally a guy who is absolutely loved in baseball wherever he goes, Brent Rooker. And so great to see him get that extension, but also just get the opportunity to play every day and show that he is what the Twins thought he was when they drafted him way back when he was a slugger from Mississippi State, right? Which is, the headline was, this guy is a potential 30 home run bat. That is exactly the player he's ended up turning into.
And the interesting thing with Rooker, like I mentioned, they drafted him twice. He didn't get a huge opportunity with the Twins.
Nope.
2020 was
because didn't he break his arm against the Cardinals?
Was that 2020 or is that late in the season in 2021. So he played 7 games in 2020 and 58 games in 2021. And so I think he probably would have gotten more of an opportunity, but the Twins made that deal. What was it, the eve of opening day, right? Where they traded Rogers and Rooker and got back Paddock and the reliever.
Emilio Pagan.
See, I've tried to erase him from my memory. And so I think there was value there. Like Brett Rooker had value at that time. He was coming off a not great season, but coming off injury, and it wasn't like the Twins were the only team to give up on him. Right, bounced over to the Padres, didn't really get a shot. Then the Royals, and then the A's, and has been kind of a revelation, and good for him. Like, and to sign this deal at before his age 30 season.
Yeah, it's cool.
That's super cool, and it's going to happen. Like, it's not totally different than Willie Castro, right? Yep. And so it's always fun when you see guys that you followed for a while and had high hopes for, then have success, whether that's for the Twins or for another team. And there's probably people out there that get angry about Brett Rooker doing this for another team, but for me, it's like that's a super cool deal where you got an opportunity and then become a 5.5 WAR player for a ball club that was a dumpster fire and now has a chance, and he'll hopefully get to play in a really sweet stadium and have a right. I mean, he's going to play in Vegas eventually after, the Sacramento thing.
Yeah.
But making a life-altering amount of money.
Yeah,
and swinging a bat at a ball. So good for Brett Rooker, super cool, and you're happy for people like that.
Absolutely agree. All right, Jeremy, here's the next thing I want to talk about with you. If I can figure out my screen share situation here. I wanted to touch base on this with you, right? Because I want to talk about the Cubs for a second before we deal with our last topic, because Fangraphs has been dropping their ZiPS projections, Dan Szymborski's projection system, right? Which is always like a really fun, at least to me, portion of the off season, because it gives you an opportunity to kind of reflect on, here's like a barometer of where our roster is at for the teams that you follow. And obviously there are going to be times when projections for guys are great and work out really well. There are going to be times when projections are less accurate. But I did like a triple take looking at projections for the Cubs lineup. This is like a elite, potentially World Series contending lineup. And we have spoken and had conversations about how there's work to do on the pitching, both in the bullpen and certainly, especially in the starting rotation. But I think it was last episode where we spent time covering the Kyle Tucker trade. But right. I just can't believe how robust the Cubs lineup projection is. There's not a position projected below 2.5 WAR. The corners there with Michael Busch and Matt Shaw, who ZiPS likes to be a solid regular already. And then the middle infield and entire outfield is just absolutely incredible. So just I guess, like, does this surprise you in the same way that it surprised me? Because I guess I like what the Cubs have done this offseason. I think we've both talked about that quite a bit, how aggressive they've been, and I hope they keep that up. But what's your take on taking a look at how their lineup stacks up projection-wise?
So how does this translate to wins, losses? Like, does it have a projection for that?
I think it puts them in like the 80, I want to say, and I could be misspeaking here. I want to say currently this puts them in the like 87 to 90 win range. But that's with, like if we look at their rotation for a second, you've got Imanaga and Justin Steele. They're doing all the work there. You don't want Boyd as your third best starting pitcher. You certainly want to add like a playoff caliber starter, and they were linked to Jesus Luzardo. They've been linked to Luis Castillo this offseason. I think they're at least part of the Crochet discussions. And so if you imagine adding potentially another like 3 WAR starting pitcher, then you're starting to get into like probably the like 90 to 95 win range.
So the one that jumped out to me that I did a double take on immediately was Pete Crow Armstrong is a four win guy. And Matt Shaw, like, I think these are high end. Like, if we're optimistic, a lot of these are that range. But I do think that sometimes when you add a proven winner to your roster that's still relatively young, you certainly have the chance. And the NL Central is just going to be weird because you never know how the Brewers are going to be. They continue to trade their best players and get better. The Pirates, the Reds are up and coming teams, right? The Reds make that deal for Lux yesterday and give up a draft pick to the Dodgers, and then now the Dodgers are going to turn that into a top 100 prospect.
And we love Mike Sirota on this show. We love Mike Sirota coming into the draft last season.
But I think the Pirates and the Reds are going to be better. The Cardinals aren't going to be down forever.
Right.
And so the Cubs, I mean, you look at their lineup and you say that team could certainly win the Central. But then I think you look at any of those rosters and say, oh man, that team could win the Central. So when you look through it with a sense of optimism, I think that's very fair. But when you get realistic about it, to think that Pete Crow Armstrong is going to do that this quick, Matt Shaw is going to do that this quick, Suzuki's going to stay healthy enough to be a 3.5 WAR player. I don't know. It'll be interesting because, like you said, the rotation is just not good enough to win that many games at this point. So
agreed.
But I think that's the thing that we do. You can do every spring, right? Hope springs eternal for all teams, and this is that case right now for the Cubs.
And let's put it this way. I think here's the charge for the Cubs that I would offer, right? And I agree with you, right? This shows a path to this team being elite, but it's certainly not there yet. If anything, this is the stick of dynamite in the backside to complete your offseason work, remain aggressive, not be satisfied with what you have, and work to make the necessary upgrades to the bullpen and the starting rotation. Because, like you said, the Central is competitive, but the Cubs should be the team flexing their farm system, financial might, all that good stuff, and putting themselves in pole position for 2025.
Right.
Okay. Let's one more kind of piece of news I want to talk through with you quick before we dig into the international signing window, which is opening here soon. This is the first time in probably 5 months that I've been excited about the Twins. All right, I'm gonna read to you from a Dan Hayes article from The Athletic. It says the Minnesota Twins ownership believes the club could be sold by opening day. An industry source briefed on the Twins sale process told The Athletic on Tuesday. The source said the club has a, quote, robust market and is expected to be sold in full. So this is a great read. I would encourage anyone to take a look, but I just wanted to get your reaction, Jeremy, because I think when we first touched on, we talked about the Ishbia brothers and how potentially exciting that would be. We were really eyeing up a timeline that was kind of 6 months to a year from when we had that discussion. And it sounds like potentially things are moving much more quickly. There's interest, and it sounds like this is something that's really going to happen, not in the long term, but in the short to medium term. Your thoughts on the idea of new ownership being in place by opening day?
So I think there's two ways to look at this one. You can look at it, you can read it and say, that's an awesome article that could mean great things. There actually is a robust market. There are people that we haven't heard of that are interested. That's certainly a possibility, which would be exciting. Then there's also the one where it's like, all right, so we had this group or these couple individuals come out almost immediately that they were interested, and people that are have a significant amount of money, and then we haven't heard anything else. So is this a source that is given Dan the ability to drop some knowledge and try to drum up some more people, right? Oh, this is going to happen faster. Maybe we need to throw our hat in the ring. It did reference a number of people that have signed NDAs and been given access. So you think that there's, where there's smoke, there's fire. But after hearing the Kevin O'Connell trade rumor
It's the
thing,
stupidest thing I've
and it's like,
ever.
well, where did that come from? That came from Kevin O'Connell's agent,
Mm-hmm.
who was trying to push, these extension talks by saying maybe another team will want to trade for him. So that's how these people. And I'm not saying that this is Dan Hayes, right? I love Dan, but sometimes you have to put out some information to continue to get other information.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there are probably people interested. Robust to me suggests
multiple
right?
possible buyers, right?
Well, if there's two, I wouldn't call that robust.
I don't know if I agree with that. I would
You would
I
call
would
two potential buyers a robust market?
I don't know that I would call two potential buys a robust market, but let's examine the asset for a second. You're talking about something that costs $1.5 billion. How many billionaires live in the United States? I have no idea. It can't
Should I
be
Google
that. It can't be that many, right? There can't be that many billionaires. And so for me, the idea of robust when it comes to Theo says too many. The idea of robust when it comes to people who can buy a baseball franchise is like three. Three is robust.
if they're going to buy it by themselves.
Or does robust mean? Or does robust mean like the prospective buyers are being aggressive in terms of the timeline in which they want to acquire the asset? Theo says he thinks robust is 3 to 5.
Right, and that's where it's hard. And so I'm hoping that news starts to come out. I think it was at the Wolves that said they don't have any interest in the Twins.
Mm-hmm.
Like if the Timberwolves thing falls through, would A-Rod and Laurie is this a thing? I don't know. So I hope, but I think given the state of the Twins for the Theo doesn't want A-Rod. Given the state of how the Twins have been here for the last 6 months or so, I think there's just a lot of people that are skeptical about anything. But what would new ownership be? They would definitely not be as cheap as the poll ads.
Yep.
They would be more aggressive. They would be more willing to spend money. And if you get one of the richest people in America and his brother, they're going to spend. So I think that's kind of the hope. And at the same time, if they're truly interested, there's no incentive for the Twins to try to make this more of a thing than it is, because they're going to push all their chips in to get this team if they want them.
Yep.
And so that's where it's like, yeah, it's probably mostly true, but I also want to think maybe I'm not going to get too excited. I think that's what we talked about before, right? Let's pump the brakes on this, because it could be a really good thing for the Twins and the Twins fans, but it's also the possibility where we could be disappointed, and you never know. So yeah, what are your thoughts?
I'm struggling, Jeremy, to not get unreasonably optimistic about a couple of things. Like, here's the connections that my brain is drawing and the conclusions that my brain is coming to, whether or not they're logical. My conclusions are, I'm inclined to take the reporting at face value, right?
Okay.
Which is to say, okay, maybe a sale by opening day, or we'll call it like mid-season, right? That feels viable. I also feel like if let's call that Theo's definition of robust is 3 to 5 prospective buyers. I struggle to contemplate a situation in which the Ishbia brothers would not be the overwhelming favorites from any 3 to 5 potential buyers.
Fair.
Just because, right, like their level of richness, they've already passed the kind of litmus test of ownership in the NBA. And so they kind of know what they're doing. Other owners of other sports franchises have signed off on them, that type of thing. They know what they're doing from the PR side. In terms of, like, I know they aggressively reduce the price of concessions for the Suns. And I know some of that exists at the Twins, but they do a terrible job of putting it out there for kind of public consumption. And so my two big conclusions that I struggle to get away from are like, yes, this is going to happen relatively soon, and it feels like the Ishbia brothers would be in pole position, but that feels like an awfully big conclusion to jump to on
Right.
both counts without knowing anything else about prospective buyers.
Right. Do you know who the richest man in Minnesota is?
I don't.
I'll give you two guesses.
I'm not a native Minnesotan, and so I feel like this is.
No, you'll know.
I can't even like form one guess.
Well, he owns a team in Minnesota.
Oh, he owns a team in Minnesota.
And he lives in Minnesota.
Well, the Wolves is it the Wolves? They're from Jersey, aren't they?
No, it's Glenn Taylor. It's the Wolf.
Oh. Glenn Taylor.
Glenn Taylor is the richest Minnesotan,
okay.
And he's not a great owner.
Yeah.
So I mean, we're looking at somebody outside of the Stanley Hubbard is actually number 2.
Okay.
Source of wealth, direct TV, and broadcasting. So I haven't heard of the other ones.
Okay.
But I don't know. I mean, it would be hard, whenever you talk about change and it's like, well, the grass ain't always greener, right? I feel like it would be hard pressed to find less green grass with the new ownership.
Agreed.
So I think that's why there's optimism, right? And that's why I think you gotta temper it a little bit, because that's a tough one to go down.
Okay, let's dig into the international signing window. So here's how we'll do this. We'll do like a little bit of an overview first, and then we'll go team by team, and I can kind of voice over like, here are a couple of the guys to be aware of, and then I want to pick your brain. I've come up with some team-specific questions for you about their kind of approaches to their class, what they're doing, and what your thoughts are on there. But I'm wondering if maybe to start, you can kind of go through like the international signing window. What is that? How's it organized? How does that all work? Like 101 for anyone who's not super familiar with it.
Yeah, so it's actually changed here recently. It used to be July that the window opened, and everybody that turned 16 before a certain point in that period was eligible to sign. So it was mostly 16-year-olds that were signing. Sometimes you have to wait a little bit for a guy to turn 16 and sign in that period.
Mm-hmm.
What they have now done, what MLB's done more recently, is to try to curb some of that spending, because there was just an ungodly amount of money being spent in the international market. Is they've now capped teams, and if they're so young, you can only spend so much money. So teams are all given a pool of money, and I think MLB would love to have a draft. The Players Association's just not keen on that because of the amount of money. So each team gets a pool. They can start signing on January 15th. They can sign up through the middle of December. Then there's kind of a dead period. Mm-hmm. And so the part about the international period that's not great is teams enter agreements with players and their trainers significantly earlier than when they turn 16. Yep. And so there's just a lot of shadiness in this market, where teams would, because if you're signed for so little amount of money, that wouldn't necessarily count towards their cap. I'm not sure, it's like 20,000 or 1,000 something. So teams would sign groups of players from the same trainer, and then to inflate that money, they would give a lot of guys, whatever the cap was, just to give other players more money. It's a very corrupt industry. MLB's tried to crack down on it. It hasn't really worked. And you'll have guys that get a ton of money that jump onto the scene right away, right? It's at 16, because again, some of these countries do a terrible job of keeping records of when people are actually born. And other people will come out of nowhere, sign for $15,000, $20,000 like Luis Ariz, and win all the batting titles for the rest of mankind. So that's kind of how it works. It's a shady industry, but it's a cheap way for the most part for teams to add young talent to their organization. The problem is that you go walk into a high school, a 15-year-old, not be able to project what they would look like as a senior in high school, right? And yet professional teams are going to third world countries, maybe not third world, but you know what I mean, and trying to find these guys and then turn them into Major League Baseball players, which is why it's so crazy that the Twins signed Jorge Polanco, Max Kepler, and Miguel Sano in the same period and got three really, really good Major League Baseball players out of the deal. Because if you get one, that's huge. If you get an all-star, that's unbelievable. But for the most part, a lot of these guys won't ever make it to the United States. They'll play in the Dominican for a couple of years to give the teams an opportunity to see, and then they're just kind of sent away. So it's a messy thing, and a lot of times, like, there's maybe a little bit of name recognition, like when the Acunas would sign, because we know who they are, right? Or Tatis, like you have sons of former players, Guerrero. But for the most part, it's like you don't know who these guys are, and you're not going to know who these guys are until they go get stateside and blow up, the Jackson Churios types of players. And then you've got something, and you've got them really young because you signed them really young.
Yep. If anyone's interested in kind of the inner workings of the international signing period, we did an episode this time last year with Ben Badler from Baseball America, who's one of the foremost authorities on this topic. I would encourage folks to check that out. And Jeremy, the only wrinkle I'd add to what you said, right, is there's a wild card this year, which is Roki Sasaki, who essentially forewent signing as a free agent a couple of years from now to come to the United States earlier from Japan, and as such is subject to being signed as an international prospect. Now, he had a choice between signing in the previous international window, which ended on December 15th, or signing in the new one, which opens next week on January 15th. And he elected to sign in the 2025 window because most teams had already spent most, if not all, of their money by the time he decided to come over. And so the situation that this might create, which is extremely unusual, is there might be players who have had verbal agreements, even handshake deals with teams for a number of years, and teams might not make good on those deals, because one team is going to land Roki Sasaki that is going to demand a significant amount, if not almost all of their bonus pool. And so that makes things even more unusual this year.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder if there's going to be teams that are like, okay, we have agreements with this player, this player, this player, this player. But if Sasaki goes to this team, we would like that guy. Right. You know what I mean? Like, is it going to slow down the whole thing? It's not going to impact 90% of the players, right? But I wonder if it slows down any news on the 15th. The teams that release their signings right away, or that those become official or become, almost official, those are the teams that didn't have a shot with Sasaki.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
But at the same time, you might not have a shot at Sasaki, but you might have a shot at the guy that
Sasaki displaced. Yeah.
Right. And so that's what's going to make this weird. And Sasaki, I mean, it's been pretty well documented who he's taken meetings with, but there's also these mystery teams that he's also taking meetings with.
Yep.
And so how everybody should show interest in that guy, but how wide is that net that he's casting on these teams that he may sign with? That's something we just don't know.
For sure. So why don't we'll go team by team here, and we'll spend just like 5 or 10 minutes on each team. And then, like I said, we'll overview the guys quick. And then I got some questions about each organization that I want to ask you that I'm curious about. So we'll start with the Brewers. The Brewers are, just to give an idea of their pool, tied with the Twins and 6 other organizations having the joint largest pool of money to spend. The thing that I note about the Brewers that I'm sure you would agree with is like their recent track record in the international market is absolutely incredible. You've got Jackson Churio, Jesus Made, Luis Lara. Like it's just a who's who of international prospects that have popped and kind of blown up after moving to the States. They do it really well. They do it particularly well in Venezuela. So they are expected to sign, and I'm going to use the term expected to sign, especially with this Roki news, because I think things are less certain than usual. 3 of the top 50 prospects as ranked by MLB Pipeline. And a word of warning before we talk about these guys is I think these rankings just simply do not matter, right? Because these are 16 and 17-year-old kids. How can you possibly rank them in a meaningful way? Pipeline tries to rank them in order of kind of prospect quality. Baseball America does it by bonus size, so we'll refer to both. So there are 3 guys in the top 50. Kenny Fenelon, he's an outfielder out of the Dominican Republic, 17 years old, kind of comes from a baseball hotbed, explosive athlete type of guy, plus speed. He is expected to sign the 30th largest bonus. He's ranked 36th by MLB Pipeline. That should put him in line for somewhere between $1 and $2 million when the signing window opens. The guy that I'm most interested in initially in the Brewers class is called Braylon Antunes. He's an outfielder out of Venezuela, hails from the same region as Jackson Churio. Pipeline ranks him 42nd, but he is expected to sign the 40th largest bonus. That'll be somewhere between $1 and $1.5 million. He is an outfielder with just like good tools across the board. Seems to have a good approach at the plate, potential to grow into more power. And then their third guy in the top 50, his name is Christopher Acosta. He's a shortstop out of the DR, 16 years old. Defense first type of profile and more of like the line drive power. It's a hit over power profile for sure offensively. And he's expected to sign the 38th largest bonus. Again, that'll be somewhere in the $1 to $1.5 million range. And so I don't want to spend too much time on these guys because it feels kind of meaningless at this point. So here's my question for you.
Yep.
Is it too melodramatic to say the Milwaukee Brewers are the best at this out of any organization in baseball?
Yeah, I mean they've had a lot of success recently, but I think when stacked against other organizations over time, they would be up there. Mm-hmm. But it's really, I mean, it's like saying the what teams are the best drafters, right? And I don't know that you can accurately ever say that. The Brewers have had a lot of success recently, and for that, I think they get a lot of credit because they're looking for something in the right place. They're very good at it. To say that they're simply the best, I don't know that I would do that. But they do get guys to the majors. They get them there quickly with Churio. Amade's not far behind. But again, we're talking about teenagers. We're talking about 16-year-olds. We're talking about guys that would be high school sophomores in America. Yep. And it's extremely difficult. You get a whole bunch of guys. You try to find your guys. You get them to the complex. Try to educate them, teach them the language, see what they develop into as 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, and go from there. For all we know, they could have just been very lucky recently, right?
So let me ask you a different question then, because I feel you, and it's absolutely impossible to make a definitive statement like that. How do you think about, or how do you value, like, do you place more value on guys who pop and turn into legitimate prospects, right? So like Jesus Mate is a good example. He's played 1 year. He's popped big time as a prospect, absolutely crushed, and is now hyped up as they're somewhere in the like 1 to 3 range in terms of the Brewers farm system. Right. How do you value that versus guys who are MLB contributors, right? You refer to the Twins, was it 2009 class that had Polanco, Kepler, and Sano. And those three guys, what they amounted to was three everyday MLB regulars, where Kepler and Polanco in particular had some seasons that popped, right? Like 3-4 win type seasons, but the majority of their seasons were in the 1 to 2 win range. Do you place more value on one versus the other of those things, MLB contributors versus hyped prospects?
Yeah, for sure. And it's all about how these guys are going to be when they make to the majors, right? And so you can spend all the money on Jason Dominguez,
Mm-hmm.
and if he doesn't ever become an all-star, who cares if he was your number one prospect? Who cares if he was untouchable in trades?
Yep.
It's the same with Oswaldo Arcia, right? He was
Your favorite?
Well, he was the next big thing until it turns out actually he wasn't,
Yeah.
right? And so anytime a guy makes it to the majors, it's a success. And so I do believe that to be true. But if you become a number one prospect in single A because of what you've done and nobody saw it coming, that's cool. That might lead to some success,
Mm-hmm.
but that didn't make it a win for you, right? It's the guys that make it to the major leagues and then are contributors to a successful team that make that a win. So Jackson Churio at this point, yeah, he's a win. You sign him to a long-term deal. He's making history in some of the things that he's done.
Mm-hmm.
But that it became the win when he's a big league player, not because all of a sudden on prospect lists he was what he was. But I mean, when you see that from teams, you're excited about it. It's the exact opposite as when you're spending money on what's the dude the Twins just signed. He got a huge deal. No, not Mike Ford. They signed him last year. He was like a shortstop, signed a huge deal. I want to say with like the Braves. He was the next big thing, and then was awful. Right, the Twins signed him. The Twins signed like Amaris. Can't think of his last name. He was going to be the next big thing. Never made it out of low A. Like those don't count for anything, right?
Yep. I feel you. The one like nuance I would put on that is I think maybe it's slightly different depending on what your approach is as an organization. I would agree with you in terms of the Brewers and the Twins, who are reliant on drafting and developing their own guys, right? And if you look at their lineups and their rotations, a lot of them are made up of guys that the organization has either taken in the Rule 4 draft or taken in the international market and developed. For a team like the Cubs, I think maybe there's equal value in developing guys who pop, because maybe your approach is more reliant on acquiring major league talent through trade,
sure,
or buying your major league talent. And so you can look at like, can they net you value? Like Luis Arraez is actually a great example of that, right? You spoke about how he signed for a $40,000 bonus. His value was not only in like 4 major league seasons with the Twins, his value was also in acquiring Pablo Lopez, who's accrued almost like 8 WAR in 2 seasons anchoring the Twins rotation.
Right. And if you want to talk about like everybody that we're going to talk about today, I'm assuming are position players.
Yes.
Right. Pitchers just don't sign. But when you look at some of the success the Twins have had with international pitchers, like that's been impressive as well. And it's not even necessarily success for the Twins, but unearthing lesser known guys who became something. Yep. Luis Gil, right? That's a real thing.
Yep.
Brusdar Graterol, didn't see that one coming. Fernando Romero was a major league player before he wasn't. But they've had success in identifying these guys. Juan Duran was not signed by the Twins, but identified at a young age and brought over. Huascar Ynoa was signed by the Twins, traded for Jaime Garcia. I think he's back. Did he re-sign?
He's back on a minor league deal, yeah.
And it's like, so they've identified
exciting stuff.
And those guys are way harder to identify because they're pitchers that are like, who knows if they're going to throw 98 or throw 68 because they're 16 years old.
And you brought that up, Jeremy, and so let's just like for 30 seconds touch on that. What you said is true. Pitchers don't sign for big bonuses because it's like in like Madden or EA college football where you have to scout the guys. You can just see less of what they're going to become than position players. You can see less of their kind of attributes that you're scouting, if you will. It's just very challenging to understand how an 8th grader is going to like pop in terms of what their arm talent is going to look like when they're 20.
Right.
Okay, let's move on and talk about the Cubs. A little bit of a different approach that the Cubs take with dealing with their international market that I want to ask you about. So the Cubs have less money. They're kind of one of the middle of the pack bonus pools. 3 guys to highlight here. Number 10 ranked prospect by Pipeline, Juan Cabada. He's a shortstop out of the DR. 16-year-old, kind of hit over power profile, good supplementary tools. He's not signing a huge bonus. It's 24th ranked, so somewhere in the like $1.5 to $2 million range. Wilfred De La Cruz is an interesting one. He's a 13th ranked prospect, signing the 10th ranked bonus, I believe, which is going to put him in the mix for like $2 to $3 million. He's a 17-year-old switch hitting shortstop out of the DR. Good strike zone awareness. Potential for plus power, all of that good stuff, potential to stick at the position. And then another guy, Juan Tomas, who isn't actually ranked by Pipeline, but he's expected to sign a fairly large bonus, 34th overall. He's a 17-year-old switch hitting shortstop. And so with the Cubs, and they've done this a couple of years in a row, what I notice is they tend to target 1 or 2 of kind of the bigger fish in the pool in terms of handing out some larger bonuses. Whereas with the Brewers and Twins, what you see is they're kind of middle class operators. They'll sign like 3 or 4 guys to deals between $1 and $2 million to get more kind of bites at the apple, so to speak. The Cubs approach seems to be target 1 or 2 guys maybe that are larger bonuses. Potentially there's more kind of superstar upside there, maybe, is the thinking. So I'm just curious what you make of that approach and whether that makes sense for an organization that has less resources at their disposal in terms of bonus pool money.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of choose your own flavor, right? I mean, you walk into a casino and you have your preference of where you're gonna put your money, if you're gonna go to the high roller area or if you're not. And so I'm not going to fault a team for saying, "Hey, we're gonna throw $3 million at a guy and think that we could have something." They could miss, but they could just as easily, on missing as the $3 million guy, it's hit on a $20,000 guy. And so it's just kind of how do you want to allocate things, and you get comfortable with that. And it's there. We'd have to really look because there's some teams that have multiple Dominican teams. So it's like they give them maybe more of a chance to stick around. They take more guys in. There's teams that there's quicker turnover, right? Where you bring a guy in and then they're gone. And so I think a lot of teams have their own system and there's not really any consistency. And I think that if you start at the very, very top of the major leagues, it's a copycat thing, and you start to see every team kind of doing it the same. And you get so far down into the Dominican summer leagues and the complexes and how you value certain things at that level. It's so entirely different from one organization to the next. And so no, I wouldn't necessarily say any teams figured it out, because when teams start to really figure something out, everybody copies them. And so is it right or wrong in the Cubs? No. Now is this De La Cruz a relative of Ellie? Because in that case,
no, I don't believe so.
If he was, you get more money. It's the bloodline thing. So if that's what the Cubs want to do, great. But I don't think it's right or wrong or better or worse than any other approach.
Right on. Okay, let's move to the Twins, last team that we'll touch on here. Again, tied with the Brewers and 6 others for the joint most bonus pool money here. And again, 3 guys to highlight from what is ranked as the top 50 First guy is ranked 24th overall. His name's Santiago Leon. He is actually the son of a current Twins scout. 16-year-old shortstop prospect out of Venezuela, right-handed hitter. Supposed to be kind of a patient approach at the plate, good bat to ball skills, discerning eye, 20th largest bonus. So he's going to be the kind of the headliner of the Twins class. Second guy is ranked 26th by Pipeline. His name's Carlos Taveras, an outfielder out of the Dominican Republic, 16 years old, left-handed hitter, more of a swing and miss, but good power projection type of a guy. Expect to sign the 39th largest bonus, so somewhere in the $1 to $1.5 million range. And those are just estimates, right? Don't have the numbers on those just yet. And then last but not least, 43rd ranked by Pipeline, a shortstop prospect out of Venezuela named Heritzen Castillo, switch hitter, 16 years old. And that profile is, I think, more similar to Santiago Leon's, like a more like hit over power offense with good supplementary tools, and a bonus in the 40s. So signing for around $1 million. So those are the three Twins headliners. So here's my Twins question for you, Jeremy. Okay. And let me try and figure out how to put this. We've talked about the Twins guys, the Twins hitters that have had strong success, and teams spend most of their money on hitters. That's why we kind of focus the conversation there. Max Kepler, Jorge Polanco, Luis Arias, Miguel Sano, all from a previous regime.
Yep.
Emmanuel Rodriguez is part of the 2019 class, so he's part of the Falvey regime. But outside of that, the Twins really don't have and haven't had a guy who has been a consistent major league contributor who's a bat for a long while. So is it fair to say that the Twins have had a disappointing return in the international market, or do you feel like it's just that random and it's a little bit of a harsh generalization?
Yeah, I would say if you change the word return to run, I would say 100%. It's been a disappointing run because the big names haven't, like the trajectory on them haven't, none of them have gone, right? And so I think it has been a disappointing run, but it all kind of, it's here, right? And so you have the years where you have a really good return, and then you have the years where it's not as great. And I wish, like, I know you got to put a position on all these guys, but Miguel Sano signed as a shortstop, right? He played some third base, played some first base, played some
outfield.
But he wasn't a shortstop, right? So basically your shortstops are like your small and athletic type.
Yeah, the shortstop's in center field, right? That's right. What it is.
Shortstop, center field, second base, and then your outfielders are probably corner guys that are going to end up in right or left field or first or third base, with the exception of if you get an outfielder that's really fast, then maybe if he doesn't lose the speed as he develops, because who knows how big these guys are going to be.
Right.
And then the occasional catcher, right?
Yep.
But they don't always catch forever either. So they're just 16-year-old baseball players, and they're bringing in a group of them. And but no, it's been a disappointing run. But if Erod is great,
then that puts all that to bed. And let me say this: I really like how you phrase that disappointing run. Two things I think that are noteworthy to point out, which is one is the Twins turned over who's heading up their international operation over the last couple of years. That's now Roma Barinas and Kevin Goldstein, formerly of Fangraphs. And previously it was a guy named Fred Guerrero, who now is with the Kansas City Royals, I believe. And two, we can't even kind of judge that leadership group, because we talked earlier in the episode about how all these deals are usually agreed multiple years in advance. And Barinas, I think, came in last year. And so even prospects that are signing this year are likely deals that have been agreed to before he was even in position with the organization. And so it's a little bit like the draft in that you have to give it time, you have to be patient. And I would add, the Twins do have a number of guys who had really exciting seasons last year. You've got some guys in the kind of middle rung, right? So like Ricardo Olivar, Danny DeAndrade, guys lower down, Diber De Los Santos, Yasser Mercedes, Eduardo Beltre, I rave about a lot, who all had very promising seasons and could continue to pop as they hopefully make their debut in the States this year.
One thing I want to say this, and I haven't given it a ton of thought, but one thing I would like to see, and it won't ever happen, I don't think, but if you change this, not you, Major League Baseball went to a thing where they like sponsored a league, and you bring in hundreds of young international guys every year and have them play in like a major league sponsored minor league where Santiago Leon is not a Minnesota Twin, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you give these guys, you do education, you do, from like book studies to financial education to nutritional stuff, and then you have MLB hired employees doing the coaching, doing the training, and then when they get to an age, whether that's 18 or whatever, right? Whether you want to have a separate draft or you enter them into the normal draft, I think that would be a much better way of doing this. Where, at 16 years old, maybe it's like, hey, everybody, like, it's going to be a standard thing, right? We're gonna, if you're interested in playing Major League Baseball, we'll sign for $30,000, right? Signing bonus. So it's not a ton, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then you would get an opportunity when you sign a contract with a team to then make more money, where you're not going to be trying to fabricate birth dates.
Yep.
Right. Where it's just where you can handle this differently, and Major League would run that. I wish that it was something like that, and I'm sure there's reasons.
Good idea, Jeremy.
That, but I feel like that's a much better system than what's in place.
Yeah. Certainly, there is the need for a better solution, and it's a super thorny, complicated issue. Again, I would encourage folks go back to that Ben Badler episode if you're interested, because he shared some really great insights. And as someone who is traveling and in the DR a lot, getting live looks at prospects. Okay, one quick listener question, Jeremy, and then we're going to wrap it up here. That I want to ask you from Ben, who got in touch on X. Thanks, Ben, for sending us a question. We appreciate it. Who are you most excited to watch outside the top 20 prospects for a breakout year this season in the Twins organization? Do you have a breakout prospect pick? And this question is timely because we're going to start organizational top 10s, and we're going to do those over kind of the next month or so. So anyone popping for you as a breakout pick for the Twins this year?
Well, what list are we using?
We're using the in your head. You know what? We don't need to get too attached to the top 20 piece. Let's just call it a prospect lower down the pipeline. So you can't pick like Kalen Culpepper or like Andrew Morris or like Marco Raya. You got to go into the teens at least. And someone you think is going to kind of break out.
So that is it Kadeem Jaw, like a draft pick like that. I do think a lot of, and not that we name them by name, but some of these recent signees that are going to get a little bit more time in the States.
Okay.
Because like I said, hey, 16 years old, we don't really know. So the Acuna that the Twins have, how's he going to do? Because honestly, that name has value. If he's terrible and his last name was, pick another name that fits, there's no value there, right? Yep. But because he's Raul Acuna's brother, there's value there. So the Cespedes that signed, Rodriguez, Danny DeAndrade, who's stuck around for a while. I mean, he's been in the system for a few years. Is he gonna move forward? The Pena kid that was super good last year, like, is that something that can be sustained? Beltre was really good. But that's why this is intriguing. And that's probably why you picked that question, right? Because that's where these names mostly fit. And the thing is, if those names, the word you use is pop, right? If any of those names do that, they're not outside the top 20 anymore. They're now inside the top 10.
Yep.
Right? There's no in between, right?
Yep.
You either are really getting it done or you kind of fall off the map, a la the guy that they got from the Marlins last year, right?
Yep.
What was his name? Can't even remember.
The
brother of all the other.
Yeah, Salas. There you go.
Yes. Right? I mean, that's
it. Hey, there's a third Salas signing next week.
Not with the Twins.
No, with the Marlins. No, he's one of the hot names. We'll see how that goes.
Okay. How about you? You got an answer, right?
I do have an answer. Mine is gonna be Adrian Bajorquez, who is a pitcher. Yeah, I'm going pitcher. So if you haven't heard of him, he is worth both learning more about and watching highlights of. So he's 19 years old, right-handed pitcher, 6'1"-ish. He was signed in the 2023 International Free Agent class out of Venezuela. And he's just got traits that are well set up to succeed in the upper levels of the minors. So he spent 23 in the DSL, spent all of 2024 in the States, starting in the complex league, eventually shifted to Fort Myers for 16 innings at the end of the season, strikes out a ton of guys. Only 16 innings, but struck out almost 12 per 9 innings. Fort Myers, there's definitely like a strike throwing walks issue, but there's also like 2+ pitches. His fastball's really good. I think that's up to 90, 94 and 95. And he has a great curveball too. And usually the separator, I think, for starting pitching prospects when they start to move through the levels is, do they have secondary pitches that are swing and miss that can strike guys out? Can they be nasty in the zone with their fastball and get people to swing outside the zone? And he's demonstrated that a little bit, albeit at the lower levels of the minors. So Agent Bajorquez would be mine. The O's is Carson McCusker, another great undrafted free agent signing the Twins have made recently.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, we're going to call it a day there. Just some quick housekeeping stuff before we go. Ways that you can support the show. You can find us on Twitter at DTS_pod1, on Blue Sky at Destination The Show. If you want to get in touch with us, you can send us questions at either of those places. You can also send us an email. Email address is destinationtheshow@gmail.com. We love getting questions, talking points, things that you guys want to hear about. And all of our content and videos are uploaded to YouTube. The handle is at Destination The Show. For the next couple of weeks, we're going to start digging into top 10 prospect lists. We'll likely make these a kind of like dueling situation. So Jeremy and I will each make one, and then we'll kind of compare notes and talk through guys. And I think we'll limit it to top 10 just because it just gets into the nitty gritty if you get too much outside that. So looking forward to that. We'll probably start with the Brewers next week. So thank you guys for checking us out. Happy New Year. And hopefully look forward to some more baseball news in the near future. Catch you next week.